Yahweh is notorious as a jealous and very, very militant deity. Even reading about his military campaigns in context, whatever way you define context, you cannot escape the fact that Yahweh orders the death of thousands upon thousands, possibly into the millions, of people at the hands of his earthly armies, led by people such as Moses, Joshua, David, etc. Believers in the Bible are quick to beat down assertions that words such as murderer and evil can justifiably be used to describe the character of Yahweh. Most criticisms of Yahweh's brutal military campaigns meet the familiar retort that every story must be taken in context. Sometimes the correct context is deemed to be that of the chapter or book in which the story is recorded, but when that fails to mitigate the horror of what's done, the context is said to be the entire narrative of Yahweh defending the lineage of the coming Saviour. Either way, one simply cannot avoid the conclusion that Yahweh intends that his earthly enemies be killed in battle, even if, as one might argue, it is as a last resort, though this argument is a little weak when one considers that women and children are also slaughtered several times on Yahweh's orders. Yahweh even orders that those among his chosen people, Israel, be killed if they break certain laws or follow other deities. There is a story of Israelites slaughtering members of their own family and their friends and neighbors, in which 3,000 people are killed in a single day, to Yahweh's satisfaction. The people who kill their family members are promised rewards for having done it. Yahweh even steps in to influence the enemies, hardening the hearts of the enemy leaders so as to justify their bloody annihilation at the hands of the Israelites. Why would Yahweh want that? Is he looking for a fight? The answer is yes. The answer time after time after time is yes. Yahweh is looking for a fight. There can be no doubt whatsoever that Yahweh admires, facilitates, and assists massive military operations in his own name and for his own glory. Religious people jump at the chance to lay the blame for the military horrors of the 20th century at the feet of atheism and secularism. Again and again we hear that the so-called atheistic leaders of Germany, Russia, Cambodia, even North Korea are responsible for far more deaths than are perpetrated in the scriptures or that have been perpetrated in the name of religion since biblical times. The point worth noting is that atheists rarely, if ever, admire the perpetrators, defend or justify their brutality, nor claim that their actions were anything other than pure evil. Moses and other Old Testament warlords, on the other hand, are regarded as heroes by the religious. The mass murders of the 20th century were carried out in the name of crackpot ideologies to do with state worship, communism, the special purity of German blood, and notably, the leaders demanded unquestioning loyalty from their subjects, hardly the ideals of free thinking and skeptical inquiry which atheists hold to, cherish, and encourage. But this is not my point. I have a question. If the characters of the Old Testament had had the means to carry out killings on the scale that we saw in the 20th century, if they had had vast channels of communication and organization, military technology, gas chambers, bombers, warships, and submarines, if Moses had been able to order airstrikes on his enemy cities, if Joshua had been able to equip his armies with machine guns, if, in short, it had been possible that the number of dead resulting from their military campaigns could have been made to match the number who died in 20th century wars, do you really think Yahweh's military generals would have held back? And would you still defend them as having been just, righteous, and holy wars? Would you still insist that any criticism of them could only result from an ignorance of the correct context in which they should be viewed? Rather than looking at those Old Testament battles out of context, if we could insert into those contexts 20th century military machinery and technology while keeping the justifications the same, would you still defend those wars and revere their perpetrators? Basically, you're disgusted by the number of victims of modern warfare, and it's one of the main cards you use to try to discredit atheism. How high would the numbers of dead have to be for you to be similarly appalled by the Old Testament wars initiated by Yahweh? To take a few small examples. Moses, after decimating the army of the Midianites, orders that something like 168,000 captives be killed. What if it had been 1 million? What if it had been 10 million, closer to the number that Stalin killed? Would you still be okay with Moses killing that many? If he'd had Zyklon B at his disposal, like Hitler had, is there any doubt that he would have used it? And would you defend his use of it? Pol Pot and Stalin both killed devastating numbers of their own citizens. Was Moses right to have 3,000 of his own countrymen killed for believing in other gods, which amounts to little more than thought crime? If Moses had found and executed as many thought criminals as Stalin, would Moses still be justified? Would Stalin look quite as bad? How high did the numbers have to go before you say, okay, stop, that's just wrong. The actions in this book are evil. This book could not have been written or inspired by the creator of life, morality, and love. It must be, thankfully, no more than the work of bloodthirsty men claiming divine authority for despicable acts of violence.